The nature of fear, a conversation between Sage and Dashta. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in human experience. It can protect or it can paralyze. It can be a signal guiding us toward awareness, or it can be a chain keeping us trapped in hesitation. But what is fear, really? Is it an enemy to be defeated or a tool to be understood? In this conversation, Sage and Dashta explore the true nature of fear, how it arises, and how one can move beyond its illusions to see it for what it truly is.
Dashta, what is fear? Is it real or is it an illusion created by the mind?
Fear can be understood like a smoke alarm in your house. When there is fire and smoke, the alarm goes off, sounding loudly to wake you up and warn you that something is threatening your safety. The alarm itself is not the problem. It does not create the fire, nor does it wish to harm you. Its purpose is to alert you so that you can make the right decision, either to eliminate the danger or to distance yourself from it.
If fear is simply an alarm, why do people often feel trapped by it? Why does fear sometimes control their decisions instead of guiding them wisely?
The main reason people feel trapped by fear is their recollection of past memories, particularly memories of painful or terrifying events. The physical body is designed as a tool for survival, meant to safeguard itself from harm. However, over time, we have transformed this tool into an instrument that binds us to memory and to the thoughts we create about ourselves. When a story in the mind becomes real, it becomes difficult to distinguish between what is truly happening and what is merely a thought. The mind does not differentiate between the memory of fear and the experience of fear. Both trigger the same reaction in the body. A common example is the man who is afraid of snakes. His fear is not just of the snake itself, but of the idea of a snake. As a result, in the darkness, he may also fear a black rope, mistaking it for a snake. His mind projects danger where there is none, because it has been conditioned by past experience.
If fear is often an illusion created by memory and thought, how can one break free from it? How does one see fear for what it truly is?
Here I am, sitting comfortably in my living room, watching a movie. On the screen, a character walks to the edge of a cliff and looks down at the jagged rocks below, scattered among overgrown bushes. I, who am afraid of heights, suddenly feel my heart racing. A cold sweat begins to form on my forehead. My hands tremble, my knees feel weak. It is as if I am standing at the edge of that cliff myself, about to fall. But am I really there? No, I am still sitting in my living room. My body, however, does not know the difference. My mind has created a scenario that is not real, yet my reaction is as if it were. At this moment, I have two choices. I can continue being afraid, lost in the illusion my mind has created, or I can look around and see where I truly am. If I accept the fear as truth, if I believe I'm about to fall, nothing will help me separate from it. But if I step back and become the watcher of the fear, I regain my clarity. I can then decide, do I continue experiencing this fear or do I let it go? However, fear does not disappear simply by realizing where I am. It fades only when I remove the cause of fear in that moment, the illusion itself. Observation is the key. The moment I see fear for what it is, I am no longer chained by it. To truly see fear, one must first accept that it exists. Rejection only strengthens it. Fear is like a game of hide and seek. As long as it remains unseen, it holds power. But once the one hiding is revealed, once you mark the place where it has been hiding, it loses its grip over you.
If observation is the key to freeing oneself from fear, how does one practice this in daily life? How does one train the mind to see fear without becoming trapped in it?
Habit. Habit is responsible for most of what we do in life. It is the repetition of our past experiences, shaping our daily actions and reactions. In many ways, habit is nothing more than the continuation of memory, played out over and over again. Once we recognize that fear itself is a habit, a response repeated based on past experiences, we see that it is not something fixed, but something learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. Since most fears are generated by thought, they can also be replaced by thought. But not just any thought. A fearful thought must be replaced by a fearless one. This is not about denial or suppression, but about shifting the mind's focus. More importantly, one must recognize that fear exists for protection, not destruction. When this is understood, we begin to question, Is this fear helping me, or is it preventing me from doing something meaningful? Is it a warning, or is it a mental prison built from past experiences? By observing fear without judgment and understanding its true purpose, we gain the ability to use it wisely rather than be controlled by it.
How does one begin replacing fearful thoughts with fearless ones? What is the process of transforming fear into something useful?
Fire burns, that is a fact. But if I learn how to use fire, I can eliminate the dangers it presents and harness its power for warmth, cooking, and creation. The same principle applies to fear. Through mental observation, simply watching fear as it arises, a subtle shift begins to take place. This shift creates a gap between what is real and what is imagined, allowing us to see fear with more clarity. The feeling of fear is no different from the feeling of happiness. Both are sensations moving through the body. The only difference is how they are perceived. One is typically seen as pleasant, the other as unpleasant. But in truth, both can create an enjoyable experience. For example, people watch scary movies not to suffer, but because they find enjoyment in the thrill. So what makes the difference? The observer. A person watching a horror movie knows they are an observer, not a participant. The fear is present, but it does not consume them because they recognize it as an experience, not a reality. This is the key to transforming fear. Once you begin to observe fear instead of identifying with it, you can start to embrace it, not as something to fight against, but as something to understand. In the same way a smile naturally appears on your lips, fear can exist without overwhelming you. In reality, fear cannot be replaced because it is only a thought. It has no physical existence. Thoughts and feelings are fluid. They change in an instant. The moment you recognize fear for what it truly is, the replacement happens naturally. There's no forceful effort required, just awareness.
If fear cannot be replaced but only observed, then what is the ultimate role of fear in one's journey toward knowing? Is fear an enemy, or is it part of the path?
Fear has always been a part of every living being in the universe. It is not something to eliminate, but something that serves a purpose. It is a trigger for survival, not destruction. Even the smallest ant experiences fear when it senses danger, just as a human does. But here is the question. Why does fear paralyze humans, yet not the ant? The difference is thought. Humans do not experience fear as a momentary reaction. They carry it, they identify with it, they make it a story. Instead of using fear as a natural response to danger, they turn it into an enemy, something to fight, avoid, or be trapped by. Once you truly know what fear is, you are no longer afraid. Not because fear disappears, but because you see it for what it is. A feeling, not a truth. Fear is only as real as the meaning you give it. The path to knowing is not in rejecting fear, but in accepting it as an experience, nothing more. The moment you see fear for what it is, you realize it was never truly part of you. How can you remove something that was never there? How would you take off a shirt if you were never wearing one? Fear is not something to get rid of. It is something to see through. And once you see through it, it loses its grip on you.
If fear is just an experience and not a truth, then does this mean fear can be used as a guide rather than an obstacle? How does one walk with fear without being controlled by it?
How do you walk with an empty stomach? The empty stomach itself is not the problem. The problem is inaction, the failure to feed the hunger. The same principle applies to fear. Fear as a feeling is like the hunger of an empty stomach. It is a signal, a message. If you feed it wisely, it strengthens you. It sharpens your awareness, heightens your senses, and prepares you for what is to come. Like a well-fed body, a properly understood fear can make you feel clear, alert, and protected. But if you ignore it or suppress it, keeping it starved and unresolved, it turns against you. Just as an empty stomach can weaken the body, unacknowledged fear weakens the mind, making you feel miserable, anxious, and chained. Fear is not meant to be starved or overfed. It is meant to be understood and used as fuel. When you stop fearing fear itself and instead work with it, you realize that it was never an enemy, but a tool.
If fear is a tool, then what is the right way to feed it so that it strengthens rather than weakens us? How does one ensure that fear works for them rather than against them?
Limitation is the root of most fears. If I believe that I am not a good writer, I will likely avoid writing altogether. I will stay as far away from it as possible, not because I cannot write, but because I fear my own perceived limitation. But the moment I recognize that my inability to write is a limitation, and then accept that limitation, something shifts. Now, it is no longer a barrier, but a problem with a solution. Fear thrives in the space between resistance and avoidance. The moment I stop resisting and instead acknowledge the limitation, fear loses its hold. Instead of being an obstacle, it becomes a stepping stone. The question is no longer what if I fail, but how do I learn? Thus, the right way to feed fear is to use it as a guide toward growth rather than a reason to retreat. If fear shows me a limitation, then it is pointing me towards something I need to overcome. If I accept this, fear transforms from something that weakens me into something that strengthens me.
If fear is a signal pointing toward growth, then is it possible that fear is not something to be eliminated at all, but something that will always be present, guiding us to expand?
One should not seek to eliminate fear entirely, nor can it be eliminated. Just as one cannot stop breathing in order to replace it with something else, fear is not something separate that can simply be removed. It is not an isolated function. It is part of our DNA and universal energy embedded in our survival instinct. Fear is not a flaw. It is a design, a force meant to protect, not paralyze. However, thought is what creates limitation. Thought is the listener, always reacting to the words it hears and the images it sees. Thought is shaped by its surroundings, influenced by the past, and conditioned by experience. It does not see fear as a natural instinct. It sees fear as a threat. And so it begins to fear fear itself. This is why we find ourselves in a cycle of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of fear itself. The mind, caught in its own web of thought, plays the same story over and over again, keeping fear alive where there is no real danger. But the moment one slows down the thinking traffic in the mind, all negative feelings begin to dissolve. When thought no longer feeds fear with past stories and imagined futures, fear returns to what it was always meant to be, a momentary signal, not a permanent state.
If slowing down the mind dissolves fear, then what is the best way to quiet the mind? How does one step out of the cycle of thought and into direct experience?
Imagine you are at a horse racing track, watching the horses run in circles. You want to capture a moment to take home with you, so you lift your camera and snap a few pictures. Later, at home, you choose the best one, print it, and hang it on your wall. Now, if I ask you to recall the entire event, you will likely remember only the moment you captured. But to have a conversation about it, your mind will fill in the gaps, creating a story around that fragment of memory. However, this story is not the full truth. It is a reconstruction, altered by the limitations of memory and imagination. Over time, as you repeat this story, it becomes your reality, yet it is far from what actually happened. The more you tell it, the more distant you become from the actual experience. This is how the mind operates. It selects, distorts, and solidifies fleeting moments into something it calls truth. To slow down the mind, one must simply watch thoughts come and go, without grasping onto them. Thoughts are like a spider's web. If you become entangled, you are caught like a fly. But if you simply observe the web without attachment, it has no power over you. The key is to see thoughts without identifying with them, to recognize that they are passing images, not ultimate truths.